So I think I found some of the finickiness. Let's raise the brightness up a little bit for you guys. So I think I found some of the finickiness that is caused by the modal. You may not be able to tell, but I could actually, seeing it now that it's an Ultim. I mean, I have other ones, I just didn't notice it before. But that spring there, right here in the front, is significantly pre-compressed. And if you look at the tip, is actually normally here's where the tip would be. It's well behind. And if you see this little like part right there, normally the entire tip is into the body behind that. So like you have a good millimeter or two. Before the tip gets the edge of the pen. Whereas here, even using a juice up, which is effectively a very, very, it's a G2 compatible, Pilot G2 compatible ink. Similar tip style to like a V5 RT. If you notice, that is, it fits these modals very well, but is right on the edge. Like that is almost poking out. And I think that is where they're gaining. This pre-compression of the spring is where they're gaining length. Or I guess dropping length, technically, because they've made it to 5 inches. If we look here, here's the length that they're gaining. Not the plunger. Right, ignore that because that is technically what the bolt is doing on the side there. Right, so instead of sticking out the side, it's sticking out the top. This also allows it to not have to over travel as much as a click. Often the click mechanism has to go down and around, kind of like the bolt on the side does, but you're going in instead of sliding on the side. But what we're gaining is not that plunger, but that top part. So if you see that distance between the top of the pen here and the top of the pen there, that's what we're gaining on pre-compression, which we're kind of like losing on the tip there. So the tip kind of almost sticks out, but doesn't. That's kind of where the Uniball refill is too. And that's the only reason technically the Uniball refill does operate in a modal without modification, but the tip just barely sneaks out the end. So that's why my recommendation would be cutting it off. Technically, you don't have to. And maybe if you use, I've never used a Muji Uniball refill from their stick pens, or their cap pens. That may fare a little bit better because it does fare better in the tactile turn bolt pens. Now, the other thing to look at is, it's that little bit shorter. Well, how are they gaining this back? I'm pretty sure it is on how far that tip sticks out, and how that is gained is by pre-compressing the spring more. There is a little bit of spring pre-compression here, so right there is where the spring is slightly pre-compressed on a standard. This is a stock G2 0.38 millimeter. Right, so that, like 1 millimeter right there is all that the spring is pre-compressed on a stock pen. Right, you can see how far it squishes down when you push it out, and it goes to there. And you can't see it because the grip is on. But to show how far it is pre-compressed, we can take this pen apart and knock the spring out and hold that up here. Now, Keras uses G2 compatible springs. They do not use G2 springs. You can tell that by there's the double or triple wind at the end and the beginning. But you can see that it's almost 2/3 or a third pre-compressed, like where the spring inside there is at 2/3 the length of where it would be stock. And we can compare that by unscrewing this. So if we check out the cross, they are the same length. Like I said, it's a G2 compatible. So they're basically pre-compressing it down a third of the way. Here, I have to pre-compress the spring to even start threading it. You see that? So that might be where some of the refill incompatibility comes from. It's not big. You can usually get around it either with a different spring or by cutting the refill. But then besides the spring pre-compression, the other way that they make this shorter than a standard G2, because getting it down to that 5 inches, which is what their EDK was at, minus the click mechanism. Oh, did you know you need the spring in the pen? Who knew? Oh, there's the gel separating. Must have been sitting not point down for a while. That's why, if you're wondering, air actually comes in the tip and comes out the top. That's why a lot of the brands have a little bit of stuff on the tip, because the pressure goes the wrong way. In this case, we want the atmospheric pressure pushing on this end and pushing this clump of gel down to force the ink out the tip. This one would probably take a couple scratches to get moving because of that air gap right there. And that is because it's been sitting and not being used, and there's no cover on the tip. But the other length we gain, besides the spring compression, is in the tip there. If you look, if we put the juice up in the standard G2, it would be sitting right where that tip of that G2 is. Whereas it's sitting basically the entire metal part of the tip of the juice up in front of the G2. Then you see when they're extended, they're about the same. So that's how this manages to be just that wee bit shorter than a standard G2. And realistically, without doing something crazy like Uniball did with their fat pens, where they actually have the click mechanism going around the refill, like the spring literally goes around, like it's a wider spring that goes around the refill, and there's a cup this goes into, and same thing with the plunger, is the click mechanism actually goes around and pushes on the side. Actually, technically the thing, it comes out the top. The refill is effectively the top plunger there on those fat Uniballs, and when you're clicking it, you're actually just clicking the back of the refill that has a kind of little cap on it. So that's how in the retracted state, it's the same length actually as in the extended state. Similar idea here, except they did it even shorter, because instead of having this whole mechanism out here on the back, they did it like around the refill. That's why it's got to be fat. Really interesting thing there. Yeah, like I said, that spring pre-compression and the that how close this is already to having the tip out may explain why some refills have issues, and why you want to cut down your Uniball just a hair. Is because basically you would get something like, let's see here if I can reproduce it like that. See how it's like just barely out? That's what you kind of get on the Uniballs, right there. Not where it's actually out, but it whereas on any stock pen, if you can see this seam line right there, normally that tip of the refill would be behind, all of it would be behind that line right there at a minimum. You kind of see a good example right there. So hope this was helpful, and just an insight into pen design and comparison. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.